Erick Szilagyi has had a lifelong curiosity of all things strange and unusual. He has had an early obsession in his life with UFOs, Bigfoot, and some personal experiences that he's had with paranormal activity has fueled his passion for higher strangeness. With that, his love for discussion and drive to hear others' encounters led him to hosting his own podcast, which is titled Uncomfortable. You can find it on all streaming platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, and many more. And to date, it has been heard in all 50 states and internationally in over 50 countries. So, Erick, we are glad to have you speak with us today.
Appreciate you having me in here.
Yeah, not a problem. So we kind of wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive and figure out kind of, how you started to believe in Bigfoot, where that's taken you so far, what your experiences have been. So I guess that would be my first question is, when did you kind of first believe in Bigfoot?
UFOs kicked in at about 5. Bigfoot was probably between 7 and 8 years of age. And my first experience with it was pretty much seeing a photographic still from the Patterson-Gimlin film,
right,
in a library book. And I don't know, nothing ever looked fake about it to me. And then flash forward to 1977, that would have put me at 12 years old, In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. They actually showed the Patterson-Gimlin film in its 36-second entirety, or whatever it was, maybe 56 seconds. And there was, a lot of people look at that and say, that's a guy in a costume. And when I looked at it, even though it was, at the time, there was no stabilization or anything like that, so what you saw was literally him jumping off the horse, running, trying to find some place to prop the camera up, and then finally get a couple of seconds of steady camera footage. There was just never anything about it that to me did not look organic. It just always felt true to me. I get somebody looking at something. You see stuff on YouTube all the time, and there are things that feel organic to me, and those make me take pause and say, well, I want to dig a little deeper into this. And then there's others that's like, no, come on, somebody's playing a hoax here. So the fact that I feel myself as a relatively intelligent person, well educated, and not prone to fantasies or making up crazy ideas, I kind of had to believe my own gut, that there was something honest and true about it. And I'm going to be 57 here next month, so I've spent the majority of my life. I'm not a boots on the ground investigator. I don't take my weekends and put on the hiking boots and go out looking for it. But what I realized about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago is, I think my strong suit is speaking with somebody who has had an experience and being able to draw out some detail that they don't even know they really remember. Right. And that's just through the conversation of doing the podcast. So
playing off that, you'd mentioned, going out and hunting. Mm-hmm. From the stories that I've heard, it's almost as if when someone does have an encounter with Bigfoot, they're never really looking. It just kind of happens. Yeah. Do you feel like that's kind of a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think if you go out looking for it and you do what, like any of these TV shows that are produced and have personalities in it, they're out there, they're doing whoops and they're doing tree knocks and they're doing all kinds of stuff to try to elicit a response so that they can record it. I think, having talked to a lot of people and read a lot and listened to a lot, it seems that people who just go out into the wooded areas and just do your thing. Just go there, and if you're out there to fish. If you're out there to relax and then, do a campfire with your family, that's when it seems like those types of things start to make themselves known. Yeah. It's almost like if you're out there with the intent of trying to elicit a response, they don't want nothing to do with it. Now you talk about hunting, and I hunted for a while, and this would have been in my mid-40s. I hunted a very small piece of property. It was very, very narrow and very long. And it was right outside a high school area, to be honest with you. It butted up against a piece of farm property. And I did not have permission to hunt the adjacent property. But it was a really interesting piece of property. And for some reason, I would sit on pretty much on the, a few yards off the borderline of the two properties. And I would always find myself compelled to look at that property. And there was a regular woods, and then there was a strip of pine trees that was rather wide. And then he had a little bit of a worn path, which seemed to be a pretty heavy game trail. And then behind that, there was another short row of trees, oaks and maples. And then beyond that, and this was all a relatively short distance, beyond that there was some very tall grass and some marshy wetlands. And when you would look at the wetland area, you could see where the deer would bed down at the night, because you could see all the grass was down. Yeah. And it just always interested me, really, for some reason. I'm not a freak about properties, It's right. Just it's not something I normally like. Oh, I want to go see that property. And so it was getting pretty late in the day. Had about maybe 25-30 minutes left of hunting time, and I set my shotgun down, and I left my blind. It was actually a deadfall, a tree that was really thick tree that just had fallen over, and the canopy of the tree created a very nice blind. I left my weapon there, and I stepped onto the property that I did not have permission to hunt. And I just wanted to see the property. I just wanted to walk into it. And so I started walking, and I would say I maybe got 50, 55 yards down this game trail. And as I looked up, through the corner of the trees, a little opening in the trees, I could see the corner of the house. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm far enough. So I turned around and I started to walk back. And it was a slow walk. I was in no hurry. And I don't know, maybe a third of the way back to my property, I started hearing footsteps behind me. And I immediately just I stopped. I made sure that my hands were down at my side so you could see I wasn't holding the weapon. And I was sure that it was the landowner.
Right.
And I was just waiting for him to light me up.
Yeah.
I was just waiting for him to just start tearing me apart for being on his property. And he should have, But he didn't say anything. And I waited there for a second, made sure that I had my hands at my side, and I started walking again, slowly. And after one or two steps, I start hearing step, 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 crunching in the leaf litter on the game trail. And I stopped again. And it took maybe one or two steps, and it stopped. And at this point, I had already been into Bigfoot for a long time, but Bigfoot was not in my mind at all, because I was in a very small town right outside of the property of a high school where my kids went to school. And it was just, and then it hit me, and I was like, oh my God, this is a huge 12-point buck. He smells deer estrus on my clothing, and he's following me back to my seat. Yeah. And I was like, my heart just started pounding. I'm like, this is the biggest deer anybody has ever seen. I'm gonna be on newspapers and magazines. And so I started slowly walking again, and I heard crunch, 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 crunch. Eventually get back to this deadfall where my gun was, and I had a bucket that I was sitting on, and I never turned around. But now I'm thinking, how am I going to reach my shotgun with the least amount of movement? Right. Because I don't want to spook it. Right. So I was able to grab the barrel of my shotgun. I pulled it up like this, flipped the safety off. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, so I'm going to take one step back with my left leg. I'm going to turn at the waist at the same time. It's going to be right there in front of me. I'm going to take the shot. It's going to be in the chest, but he's close enough it'll go through.
Yeah.
And I went, and I just barely turned, and I heard this, and I hear thump thump. And I turned, and there's nothing. There's nothing. And I'm like looking around, and I'm looking for a big white tail,
Right.
running away from me. And all I ever heard was boom boom. I heard 2. I didn't hear 4. I didn't hear 8. I didn't hear 16. I didn't hear it taking off down the trail.
Right.
All I heard was thump thump after a really, really loud exhale. And I start looking for like twigs bouncing or a leaf, floating back down to the ground or something. And there was nothing.
Huh.
Absolutely nothing. And I'm like, what the hell? So, I'm all jacked up. My heart's beating really quick, and again, I'm not thinking Bigfoot at all. And I'm like, oh my God, that was the biggest deer anybody would have ever seen.
Yeah.
And so I stepped 3 steps back into the property that I didn't have permission. I had my shotgun, and I'm looking into the woods. It could have gone far because you didn't hear it running off into the distance. And I'm looking, I'm scanning, I can't see anything. Finally, I walk back. I walk out of that woods into the grassy area that's maintained. And I started walking back down the row of trees to go back to my car, which was about 125, 135 yards. And I'm walking along the edge of the tree line. And as I'm walking, I'm hearing steps in the leaves in the tree line. And I had a pretty decent flashlight. I pulled it off my shining it. It's not completely dark yet. I mean, it's getting there, and I'm shining the light in there as I'm walking. And I can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a damn thing. There's no squirrel, there's no deer, there's no turkey, because there's a lot of turkey roost in that area. And it followed me 2/3 of the way to my car, and then it stopped. But when I got very close to the back of the garage, that the house that was on that property, that's when it stopped.
Yeah.
So it didn't go beyond that into, and it wasn't until a couple of years afterwards where I started kind of putting it together, and it's like, that's why, like with my show and, really big shows like Sasquatch Chronicles, or listening to Steve Isdall on YouTube when he reads emails from people who have had experiences, it's constantly putting together what you've heard that makes sense. Yeah. And he always calls them puzzle pieces, and literally they are, because it was kind of all at once that it dawned on me. It's like, okay, so I had 2 footsteps behind me. It didn't sound like a horse trotting. It didn't, And if you listen to a deer walk and a horse walk, it's very similar, other than the clip-clop from the hooves. When you add 2 extra legs into it, it doesn't sound like a human walking.
Right.
And this sounded like, at first, I thought it was the landowner. And then I convinced myself that it was a deer, but it was always just crunch, 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 crunch. And it wasn't until a couple of years after that I kind of put it all together, and I was like, was it?
Yeah, wow.
I don't know, but when you start hearing, and I guess you can, I guess it's easy to draw a point from A to point B without it being true, but sometimes, like, the simplest answer is the right answer. If you try to read too much into it, you're possibly missing
what's there. So I want to follow up on that. I have read that some believe that Bigfoot or Sasquatch have paranormal or superpowers.
You're doing it to me,
well,
aren't you?
I have to ask you that because, one, you're into paranormal things, clearly.
Right.
And 2, you heard something and then turned around and couldn't find a trail of anything.
Right.
So I mean, what would you say? What do you think about that?
Okay, so you're talking about the woo. That's what Bigfooters and people who are enthusiasts and interested in the subject, that's known as the woo.
Okay.
And the woo encompasses anything that is not really physical evidence, like footprints in the ground, castings.
Right.
Mind speak. I don't know who said it, but paranormal is only paranormal because we don't understand it yet.
Huh.
It's not necessarily something that is supernatural or like from beyond.
Yeah.
We just don't understand it.
We're not familiar with it.
The U.S. military invested millions of dollars into a project when they started using people to remote view.
Yeah.
And they spent millions of dollars on this project because it's real and it works. So we know that psychic abilities exist. So can Bigfoot's mind speak? I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Can they affect how you feel when you're in their presence? I don't know if you guys were out in the audience when I was talking about the interview I did with a witch.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
And, infrasound is known in the natural world. Tigers create it with a very low frequency in their growl, and it's designed to scare you.
Yeah.
It makes you freeze.
Yeah.
That's part of their hunting. They get the prey to not move, and it becomes an easier target. Not necessarily saying that Sasquatch or Bigfoot use that because we're prey, but is more of an intimidation, I think, as more of an influence to get out of the area because that's where they are. That's what they call home.
Right.
Possibly that's a birthing area. They have young ones there. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I think there is something to the woo. And like you get the academics like Jeff Meldrum, and who's extremely well respected and has done a phenomenal job with the footcasts and stuff like that. And even Cliff Barackman from Finding Bigfoot, they rest on this wall of science. They lean against it pretty heavily because it's easy to back yourself up when you have proven science standing behind you.
Mm-hmm.
With the woo aspects of it, we can't really measure that. Mm-hmm. Mental telepathy doesn't leave a footprint in the ground. Something physical does. So how do you measure that? And I don't think you can. So I think that's why they stay away from discussing that kind of stuff. And you can't even really, I've had personal conversations with both, and you really can't even get them off the record to talk about it because they don't have a basis to stand behind it. But it's always been one of the more interesting aspects of Bigfootery to me.
Yeah.
And I think it is. I think they have attributes. I guess I've said this before in some of my shows. Back when we were living out on the plains, mm-hmm. and there was a fire ring, and we were sleeping around the fire and the open sky above us, and we were sleeping with one eye open because we didn't know what kind of predator was going to come into the camp, or somebody had to stay up all night to make sure that the other members of the tribe didn't get taken by a wild animal or some kind of predator. That was a long time ago. We've had walls and ceilings and roofs and lockable doors and windows around us for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think we've lost some of our senses. Not to say we had 6, 7, 8, 9 senses. I'm just saying
We haven't needed them.
the acuteness of our senses have been dulled because we don't need them anymore. And I don't know if these things do exist, and I believe they do. If they're living out in the wild and they're having to, there's no evidence that these things are creating any kind of household structures. There's nesting areas, there's other places that kind of give the impression of it might be some kind of a lodge, but they're not structured housing,
right?
And there's no real evidence to show that these things are known to use anything more than maybe rudimentary tools. We never hear about fires in the middle of the woods where there's nobody at. We don't know that they're using fire, so I imagine that they have to be relying on their senses way more than what we do.
Right.
And they, quite honestly, if you're walking into a wooded area and they're there, they probably know way in advance that you're walking in. They probably hear their car door slam, from a long, long way. And I've read a couple of papers that are talking about the light sensitivity, how little bit of light over like a mile and a half away that they can recognize. Now, I don't know exactly how they know that, but I imagine it's all theories. But it's interesting stuff, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But
my last question for you would just be, I just kind of want you to tell us a little bit about that cast, where it came from, and then after you talk about that, just what you believe Bigfoot is, because there's a little bit of a controversy.
Sure.
I've heard that he's primate. I've heard that he's human. I've heard various things. So just kind of what you believe, and then just tell us a little bit about that cast.
Well, this is a cast from 1982, 1984, Grace Harbor, Washington, and 17 and a half inches, I believe, from the radius of the heel to the tip of the index toe. And this is out of Dr. Jeff Meldrum's cast collection. It's a second generation of it. And it is, if I might be mistaken, but I think it's one of the larger track ways that have been found. I think there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 or 300 footprints in a row where these casts were taken. I actually have a cast of each foot, one of the left and one of the right, from two different individuals. But those casts are the same individual left that track. You got left and right, left and right. So it's just kind of neat to have a part of history.
Yeah.
This cast was created off of an original.
Yeah.
That came out of the ground. So
cool.
it's a nice conversation piece. I like to have it at my table for events like this.
Yeah.
And people just want to rub their
feel
fingers
it,
over it and say, man, that's huge. So
people have a big foot fetish.
Yeah, they do. Weird people have foot fetishes, big or small.
Yeah.
As far as what Bigfoot is, there's a huge gap between apers and non-apers.
Yeah.
And I think when you start talking to and about the people that are in this that are more science-based, like the Meldrums and the Cliff Barackmans and stuff, I think they tend to lean more towards them being a more ape, more primate. Again, they've got that science wall that they're leaning on.
Right.
And there's precedent for it, with Gigantopithecus and Homo florensis and all the other different variations of human hominid. Excuse me. I tend to pay a lot of attention to the Native American stories about these things. And if you look into it deep enough, you'll find that throughout history, their oral traditions show that they shared the land with these things, and that they struck deals with them, and they traded food and other things. So I think they're much more, my belief is they're much more closely related to us.
Okay.
Not, I don't know. It's a tough one, you know, because you hear the mimic, they mimic different animals, and you know, there's reports of people who have a dog, and they're, hey Spot, hey Spot, hey Spot, you know, every night they call Spot to come back into the house, and then they go out in the woods and they hear this voice out in the distance going, hey Spot, you know. Well, they're mimicking, they're repeating, you know. What else would be doing it? I mean, I don't know, and you know, that's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of what they're said to be able to do seems to also relate to having opposable thumbs. So, you know, I mean, to me, that puts them more in a category of being like us.
Yeah.
Are they? I don't know. It's, you know, I think it's easy to look at something that stands up on two legs, walks on 2 feet, and even though they might hunch over, or their arms might be longer, and their head is lower set on the neck, you still want to assign human attributes to it because it looks like it walks like us.
Right.
If you watch a bear can walk upright.
Yeah.
But a bear doesn't have really long arms, and it kind of waddles more than it has strides. And these things are said to have a very smooth stride to them, almost to the point where they almost look like they're on roller skates or on skis, because you don't see any kind of head bob, and it's just a very unnerving way that they move. So I think they're more closely related to us. I don't think they're a close relative, but I think they're more us than ape.
Very interesting.
So.
Well, Eric, I appreciate you sitting down and telling us a little bit more about what you believe. And
well, I appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. So
thank you. I appreciate it.